Hello and welcome back to my channel. When I first joined publishing, I wish there was someone there that gave me a glossary of all the terms that I needed to know, because there were so many times that someone would say something or use like an abbreviation. I would be like, what does that mean? And I was too embarrassed to ask, and I felt like I should know it and all this. So one of the things that I did when I first joined the publishing industry was kept like an ongoing glossary. So I did it on the computer, and every time that I heard a new word, I would note it down, research it, or ask someone what it meant. And it was honestly one of the best things I ever did. So I'm going to share that with you today. So I've got 40 words that I want to cover. So I'm going to do it in part 1 and part 2. So part 1's going to be today. And then hopefully these can help you when you're like looking at job descriptions, or you've just started a new job and you're not really sure what people are talking about. Or yeah, you just want to get into the industry and you want to learn a bit more. So as I said, there's 40 to go through, but I'll go through the first 20 today, and I've done it in alphabetical order, of course. So number 1 is advances. Advance payments are given to the author before their book is published, and it's essentially a lump sum of money for their work, for allowing the publishers to actually publish their material. You can find more about advances and royalties in another video I did about how much authors actually get paid. And I'll put a link in the description below for that as well, so you can watch that afterwards. Number 2 is AI or TI. So I recently did a video on this about what an advance information sheet is. So that's essentially a piece of paper about a new publication that has everything that you'd need to know on it. Number 3 is ARCs. This stands for advanced reading copies. So this is like proofs that are sent out to reviewers or whatever, and some people have sent me so many lately, which I'm so grateful for. So they're advanced reading copies. So it's advanced because the book hasn't actually come out yet and they're just getting some reviews on it, or they're just like printing like dummy copies of it. Number 4 is APC, which is an article processing charge. Now this is normally for like journals, and one thing I was going to mention as well is this, all these words that I'm going to say is predominantly book publishing, but I will try and make it quite broad so that it can apply to different types of publishing as well. But yeah, APCs are article processing charges, and that's like it's like a publication fee, so that's often given to authors to make their material available or in journals or open access or whatever. Number 5 is Biblio. Biblio is used a lot in the publishing industry, especially at the big publishing houses, and it's a content management system, and it's basically got all the information that you need to know about all of your titles at that particular publishing house. It has the pub date, the ISBN, it has the like who's the editor, it has when you want the books in stock, it has literally everything on there. So it's basically a massive system that every department will use. Number 6 is bleed. So when you say something has got a bleed, it is like a bit of extra text or images or colour or something on a proof that shouldn't be there. Basically, it's basically you have the trim lines, and it's the bleed is the bits that go out of the trim lines. It's essentially there to give any leeway for any sizing issues, printing issues, etc. So I remember people saying about bleed before, and I'd be like, I'm so confused. Like obviously I knew they didn't mean like about actual blood, but I think to be honest, it's more common when you're looking at covers rather than text files. So me personally, I tend to look at text files a lot, and there's not really like any bleed on those. It's normally to do with the covers. Next one is CIP data. This stands for cataloguing in publication data. That's usually found on the imprint page or the copyright page of a book. It's just a bit of information, basically a bit of data about that book that you can find at the Library of Congress or the British Library. The next one is CMS, so that stands for Content Management System. So for example, Biblio that I mentioned that different publishing houses might use, so it's it manages all your content, so all of the titles that you'll be working at, all the journals that you might be working on at a publishing house. The next one is CMYK, and if you have a printer or I mean this isn't technically industry specific because CMYK is just a printing term, so it stands for cyan, magenta, yellow and black or key. And it's the 4 colours that are used in printing. The next one is critical path. So this is really important in the publishing process because everything in publishing has a key date that you have to stick to, and the critical path is basically a list of all those key dates that each one of those has to be stuck to in order for the publication to actually be made on time. The next one is extent. So this is basically the number of pages in a book, but it's not necessarily the ones that you see at the bottom where it says, it's got 250 pages, because extent also includes like the front and the back matter. So that's the contents page or the imprint page, or the back it might be like the indexing or the bibliography or about the author or anything like that. So the extent is the full number of pages from the very beginning to the very end of the book. The next one is gratis copies, which is also known as frees. These are literally free copies that usually like the author would get, for example, when their book is published. They usually have like a right in their contract to have, say, 15 copies of their book. The next one is house style, so like the publisher's house style. So it's basically a publisher's own guide and rules that the editors and the authors will have to stick to in terms of like structure, spelling, grammar, punctuation, etc. For example, when you're talking about speech, if you're using single quotation marks or double quotation marks, if it's an American book or an English book and you're using S rather than Z, for example, so that's all to do with the publisher's house style. The next one is HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and this is more of like an IT data term in terms of publishing because it's a markup language and it's used for web pages, etc., and it helps you with the appearance of how something looks online. So whether it's like in bold a text, whether it's got a really big paragraph, whether it's in black or if it's in white, etc. You can also see as well the HTML coding. If you go on literally any web page and you right click and you click inspect, and it will bring up on the right hand side like all of the HTML, like the markup language, and you can see, and you can actually play around with it as well, and it will change what you see because it's to do with the appearance. But if you were to like cross your Chrome off or whatever and go back into it, it doesn't save those changes, so it doesn't affect the web page altogether, it affects how you're seeing it. The next one is imprint, so this is just like a particular list within a publisher to identify like a particular style. So we have Raven Books, for example, is one of our imprints at Bloomsbury, and that's like our thriller, our kind of crimey books. Then we have like Absolute Press, for example, which is a lot of our cookery books. So an imprint, it can just be like a made up list, but a lot of the time it's where we buy or acquire different imprints as well. The next one is indies, and it sounds so obvious when you think about it. It just stands for independent bookshops. So indies, so independents. And when I first started publishing, I heard this term used all the time, people saying about indies, support local indies, and I kind of assumed it meant independent bookshops, but I was never really sure, and I wish someone had told me at the very beginning that I was right, like I guessed it right, because I didn't ever want to ask someone because it seemed almost so obvious. But yeah, indie stands for independent bookshops. The next one is IPR, which stands for intellectual property rights, which is what the authors of a material have as soon as they make their product into a tangible or palpable material. So when it's not just in their head, but when they actually write it down and it's like a physical product, they then hold the IPR, like the intellectual property rights for that material. The next one is ISBN, which is used all the time in publishing. It stands for the International Standard Book Number, and it's basically a unique code. It's usually 13 numbers long, but I think you can have like the 10 ISBN as well. But it's usually 13 numbers long, and it's basically a unique identifier for a particular title, a book, or and in journals they have it as well, so they won't necessarily use ISBNs, but they might use like DOIs, I think they call them, so it's digital object identifiers, but it's all kind of the same thing. It's basically a unique code given to that particular book. The next one is license deals, so this is usually talked about a lot in the rights department, so it's basically licensing your material to another publisher for them to print it like in their own territory. So production do deal with that a lot as well, because they might have to send the materials to the different publisher, for example. Rights will get involved because it's a right, essentially you're licensing the right for another publisher to publish that material. And finally, number 20 on this video is list. So it's essentially like a different genre or a different section or a different topics of a list. So I work in Bloomsbury Academic, for example, but we have different lists within that. So I personally work on the literary study lists, the philosophy lists, the drama, art and Shakespeare lists, and the film and media lists. So they're almost like different genres about what the books are. So I've worked on the history list, for example, before, so that will be self-explanatory. It's books about history. I don't know, it's almost like it's a term that seems really obvious. It's just a list of books, but it's your list, it's your topic, it's your section that you work on. So that's the 20 terms, first of all, that you need to know if you want to work in publishing or you're just starting out and you don't know what these words mean. I've got another video coming really soon about the other 20 that you should know as well. I've done it in alphabetical order, so I can kind of follow it really easily. So make sure you do check out part 2 when it comes out. Thank you for watching.